Sometimes the smallest act of kindness writes the biggest story of your life. He never knew that giving his blood would give him a future he could never dream of. This is the story of a single dad, a stranger girl, and the moment that changed everything. John Miller was 38 years old, but his tired eyes looked much older. Every wrinkle on his face carried a story of sacrifice, of sleepless nights, of a man who had chosen to carry the world alone. 5 years ago, his wife had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving behind a little girl, Emily, just 3 years old at the time. Since then, John had been mother and father both. He woke up early every morning, cooked breakfast, packed Emily's school bag, and then rushed to his small mechanic workshop at the edge of town. Money was always short. Rent was late more often than on time. Some days, he had to choose between paying the electricity bill and buying Emily a proper meal. Yet no matter how hard things got, John never let his daughter feel the hunger of love. He would smile, crack silly jokes, and tell her bedtime stories about kings, warriors, and dreamers. Emily adored her father. To her, he was not just a parent, he was her hero. But John carried a silent burden, the fear of failing her. One rainy night, after putting Emily to bed, John sat at the workshop desk with unpaid bills spread before him. The sound of rain on the tin roof was heavy, but not heavier than the storm in his heart. He whispered to himself, maybe this is all life will ever be, just surviving. But destiny had already written a twist. It was a Saturday morning when John received a call. The local hospital was looking for urgent blood donors. A young woman had been in a terrible accident. She had lost too much blood, and her rare blood type was hard to find. John hesitated. He was exhausted from the week's work. He had planned to spend the day fixing Emily's broken toy, and maybe treat her to ice cream. But something inside him, perhaps the memory of his wife's last moments in a hospital bed, told him he had to go. Emily, he said softly, kneeling in front of his daughter, Daddy has to go help someone today. Be a brave girl, okay? Aunt Linda will watch you for a while. Emily nodded, her big brown eyes full of curiosity. You're going to save someone, Daddy? John smiled faintly. I'll try. And with that, he rushed to the hospital. The emergency room was chaotic, full of doctors shouting instructions. John quickly filled out the forms and rolled up his sleeve. As the needle went in, he whispered a silent prayer for the unknown life connected to his veins. Through the glass window, he caught a glimpse of her, the patient, a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, unconscious, pale as snow. Machines beeped around her. Doctors fought to stabilize her. John didn't know her name, didn't know her story. All he knew was that she was someone's daughter. Maybe someone's sister, maybe someone's mother. When the blood transfusion began, a strange feeling came over him, as if his own life was flowing not just into her body, but into his destiny. Hours later, the doctor came out and said, she's stable now. Whoever donated blood, you saved her life. John just nodded. He didn't wait for thanks. He went back home quietly, hugged Emily tight, and carried on with his life. For him, it was just an act of humanity. For her, it was the beginning of everything. For John, life went back to normal, or at least what he called normal. Every morning was still the same, waking up before sunrise, fixing Emily's breakfast, packing her little lunchbox, then heading off to the workshop. The hospital visit faded in his mind. He didn't even expect to hear back from them. He had no idea who the girl was or what her story was. For John, it was just something he felt was right. But destiny doesn't forget kindness. 1 week later, as John was repairing a customer's car, he heard a voice behind him, soft, elegant, and unfamiliar. Excuse me, are you John Miller? John turned around. Standing in front of him was a young woman, tall, graceful, dressed in a white designer suit. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her heels clicked against the workshop floor like they didn't belong there. She looked like someone from another world. John wiped the grease off his hands with a rag and nodded cautiously. "Yes, I'm John. Can I help you?" The woman's eyes softened. "I'm Sarah Collins. You saved my life." John blinked, trying to connect the dots. Sarah continued, her voice breaking slightly. "The hospital told me. It was your blood that kept me alive. If you hadn't shown up that day—" She paused, her eyes glistening. "I wouldn't be standing here right now." John felt awkward. He wasn't used to such emotions from strangers. He shrugged lightly, trying to brush it off. "I just did what anyone would have done." But Sarah shook her head firmly. "No, most people don't give without asking. Most people don't stop their lives to help someone they've never met. You did." John gave a small, tired smile. "I'm glad you're okay. That's what matters." For a moment, Sarah just stared at him. She noticed the grease on his hands, the worn-out shirt, the tired eyes that still carried kindness. She also noticed the little photo, taped to the wall behind his desk. A smiling girl with missing front teeth. "Your daughter?" she asked gently. John's expression softened immediately. "Emily, she's my world." Something in Sarah's heart shifted. Sarah Collins wasn't just any girl. She was the daughter of William Collins, the late owner of Collins Enterprises, one of the largest corporate empires in the city. After her father's passing, Sarah had taken control as the acting CEO, but despite her wealth and power, she had always felt empty, lonely. People around her only saw her money, her position. Friends were rare. Trust was even rarer. But here was this man, a mechanic, a single father, who had saved her life without expecting anything in return. Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years, genuine gratitude. A deity, an unusual offer. Over the next few days, Sarah visited the workshop again. Sometimes she would bring coffee for John, sometimes small toys for Emily. At first, John was suspicious. Why would someone like her keep coming back? One afternoon, Sarah watched John as he struggled to balance work and fatherhood. Emily was sitting in a corner, drawing pictures on scrap paper, waiting patiently for her dad to finish fixing another car. Sarah's heart ached. She had grown up with everything money could buy, yet she had never felt the warmth between this father and daughter. Finally, she spoke. "John, have you ever thought about doing something bigger?" John chuckled, tightening a bolt. "Bigger? Like what? I barely keep this workshop running." Sarah leaned forward. "Like working with me. I could use someone like you." John froze. He thought she was joking. "Me work with you?" "Yes," Sarah said seriously. "Not because of charity, not because you saved my life, but because I see something in you, integrity, hard work, the kind of leadership most of my executives lack." John shook his head quickly. "I'm not a businessman. I fix cars. I raise my daughter. That's all I know." Sarah smiled softly. "Sometimes, John, that's exactly the kind of person who should be leading. A deity, doubt and pride." That night, John lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sarah's words echoed in his mind. Leadership, integrity, bigger purpose. But then his insecurities came crashing in. He was just a mechanic, a single dad barely surviving. What did he know about business meetings, boardrooms, or companies? He glanced at Emily, sleeping peacefully beside him. He whispered, "I don't belong in her world. I just need to make sure you're safe." Yet deep inside, a seed had been planted. A deity, the twist of fate. The very next week, fate forced John's hand. His workshop landlord announced that rent would increase by 40%. If John couldn't pay, he would lose the shop. John begged, argued, even offered to work extra shifts. Business is business, he said coldly. John's world was collapsing. Emily's school fees were already overdue. Now his only source of income was under threat. When Sarah heard about it, she didn't hesitate. She walked into the workshop, wrote a check, and handed it to John. He refused immediately. "I can't take your money. I don't want pity." Sarah's eyes flashed. "This isn't pity. This is an opportunity. Work with me. Help me run my company. In return, I'll help you secure a future for Emily." John's hands trembled as he held the check. Pride told him to say no, but Emily's innocent face told him otherwise. After a long silence, he finally whispered, "All right, I'll try." That night, John looked at Emily and said, "Things are about to change, sweetheart. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm doing this for you." Emily hugged him tightly. "I believe in you, Daddy." And for the first time in years, John believed in himself. John's first day at Collins Enterprises was like stepping into another planet. The glass skyscraper, polished marble floors, men in suits with shiny watches, women in elegant heels. It was nothing like his grease-stained workshop. He wore his only clean shirt and borrowed tie. Emily had hugged him at the door, whispering, "You look like a superhero, Daddy." That gave him courage. But the corporate world was merciless. At his first meeting, executives looked him up and down, whispering. One smirked, "A mechanic?" In a boardroom, another chuckled, "What's next? Hiring janitors as directors?" John stayed quiet, his hands sweating. Sarah sat beside him, her gaze sharp. When one executive openly questioned, "Miss Collins, are you serious about bringing him into our company?" Sarah replied firmly, "Yes, he saved my life. But more than that, he's here because I trust his values. Something this company desperately needs." Still, humiliation cut deep. When John spoke, his voice was shaky. He didn't know the corporate terms, didn't know the reports. But when they discussed problems with late shipments and broken supply chains, John leaned forward and said, "Maybe the solution is simpler. I've worked with trucks my whole life. If you actually listen to your drivers instead of just numbers, you'll fix delays." The room went silent. For the first time, some executives looked impressed. That night, John sat with Emily, exhausted but hopeful. "They think I don't belong, sweetheart," he said. Emily squeezed his hand. "Show them you do." Weeks turned into months. John faced constant ridicule. At lunch, executives ignored him. Some mocked his old shoes. Others laughed when he didn't understand corporate jargon. One day, during a major presentation, a senior manager accidentally switched off his projector. The room erupted in laughter. John's face burned with shame. He wanted to walk out, but then he remembered Emily's words. "I believe in you, Daddy." He took a deep breath and spoke without slides. "I don't have fancy charts, but I know what it means when a delivery truck breaks down at midnight. I know what it means when workers miss their kids' birthdays because no one cares about schedules. You want solutions? Start treating workers like humans, not numbers." The room grew silent again. Sarah smiled proudly. For the first time, John felt like his voice mattered. At home, Emily hugged him and whispered, "See, you don't need their fancy stuff. You have a good heart." Slowly, things began to shift. Some employees started approaching John secretly for advice. Drivers respected him because he listened. Factory workers trusted him because he understood. The executives still mocked him, but whispers of his leadership spread quietly. Then came the crisis. Collins Enterprises faced a massive problem. A foreign supplier pulled out at the last moment, leaving shipments worth millions stuck. Executives panicked. Stock prices dipped. Everyone blamed each other. Sarah looked around the boardroom. Nobody had answers. Finally, she turned to John. "What do you think?" Every eye in the room rolled. "You can't be serious," one executive scoffed. John leaned forward. "We don't need overseas supplies. We have local partners who are ignored because they're small. Give them contracts. They'll deliver faster, cheaper, and it will support local workers." The board laughed, but Sarah nodded. "Do it." Within weeks, John's idea saved millions. Not only that, but the company's reputation skyrocketed for supporting local businesses. Newspapers ran headlines, "Collins Enterprises chooses people over profit." The executives who mocked him now whispered in corners, realizing he had done what they couldn't. But John didn't care about fame. One night, Emily sat on his lap and asked, "Daddy, are you a boss now?" He smiled softly. "Not yet, sweetheart, but I'm closer." Months later, another storm hit. Sarah collapsed in her office from exhaustion. Doctors advised her to step back from leadership temporarily. The board scrambled to appoint an interim leader. Most executives eyed the seat hungrily, but Sarah shocked them all. "I choose John Miller." Gasps filled the room. "The mechanic." "This is a joke. He's not qualified." Sarah's voice cut through like steel. "He's the only one qualified. He saved my life. He saved this company. And he knows what dignity and leadership mean better than any of you." John's heart pounded. He stood up slowly, looking at all the powerful men who once mocked him. "I didn't ask for this, but I'll take it. Not for pride, not for revenge, but for every worker who's ever been ignored. For every father trying to raise a child alone. For every person who was told they didn't belong." That day, John Miller, the mechanic, the single father, the man who once struggled to pay rent, sat in the CEO's chair. His first act was to raise wages for the lowest workers. His second was to open scholarships for children of single parents, in honor of Emily and Sarah's father. When reporters asked him how it felt, John looked at Emily, who was holding his hand, and said, "I was never meant to be here. But sometimes life rewards you for the sacrifices you thought no one saw. I gave blood to save a stranger, and in return I gained a family, a future, and a chance to lead with dignity." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she whispered, "You're my hero, Daddy." And in that moment, the world finally saw him for what he truly was, not just a single dad, but a leader, a protector, and a man whose kindness changed everything.